Okay, so we ended last time with this concept of language kind of conjuring images for us. I had us imagine this arbitrary kind of collection of symbols, and I made you in your head imagine a cat, right? And everybody's just different. Some people had a black cat, some people had an orange cat, some people's cats were fat, some were skinny, etc. And then we talked about how like this itself then isn't the cat, right? The thing in your head is not the cat, but you somehow have created this image just by a word. And so there's a kind of like, I think it's kind of magic. There's a kind of magic that happens when somebody utters a word and it conjures something into being that would into a kind of being at least. Not a full being, because it's not an actual cat, but into a kind of like other state inside your head. That's kind of exciting that we can conjure like that through language, right? And so then we were starting to look at Vardaman's section when he was imagining a horse. So let's go to that, not imagining, but thinking about a horse. Let's go to that section. It's section 13. Yeah, 13. I think for you guys, it's like around 58 or so, the end of section 13. I don't have all of the school copy pages written down. Is that right? What page number is that?
57.
57. Man, pretty good memory. All right. So actually, I actually want to go back to the beginning of that section. So whatever the page that is. Okay, cool. Where he says, then I begin to run. All right, so Vardaman has just experienced his mother's death at this point. And he's a little kid. We don't know exactly how old, and we also don't know, but people have speculated, like, judging by the ages of the other siblings, Vardaman might not be as young as he seems in his narration. Some people have speculated he might be, like, neurodiverse in some way, that he, like, the reason that he doesn't communicate the way the others do isn't just because of his age. And this section, to me, kind of supports that idea because he has such an interesting way of expressing himself and a way of viewing the world. So he starts out here and he's in the present tense. Then I begin to run. I run toward the back and come to the edge of the porch and stop. Then I begin to cry. I can feel where the fish was in the dust. It is cut up into pieces of not fish now, not blood on my hands and overalls. Then it wasn't so, it hadn't happened then. And now she is getting so far ahead, I cannot catch her. So he's trying to figure out his mom's death. Like he's trying to like contemplate something that maybe he hasn't had to deal with so much in the past. And so he's using this fish as a way to like put into context his own mother's death, right? But this way of thinking about it, where he says, it is cut up into pieces of not fish now. Why is that significant to the way that he understands death, do you think? Ella?
He understands death as to be like once it is dead, it is no longer what it used to be. So like maybe when he sees his mom dead, he's like, okay, that's no longer my mom.
Yes, exactly. There's some sort of transference that has happened, right? Some sort of transformation that has happened when his mom loses like whatever spark was in her eyes that Darrell talks about, the fire in her eyes. And she's doing that while she looks at Vardaman, right? Like it's Vardaman sees that moment. And so he sees like this difference between it's not that like my mom has changed. Instead, he's like, that is not my mom anymore, right? And now he has to figure out then, if that's not my mom, if something that is dead is a not thing, then where is my mom? Like, how could this, he doesn't understand that something could just like evaporate and become a nothing anymore, right? So he says, and now she is getting so far ahead, I cannot catch her. So what does that suggest to us about the way that he's viewing his mom's death right now? Brooklyn?
It kind of sticks with that imagery of the fish. Like at least for me, it kind of makes me think of like if he's trying to catch a fish and it keeps like slipping away, like just something that's always like out of his reach.
Oh, good. I like that. So it's like he understood that once he caught the fish, it was a fish, and then he was able to turn it into not fish, right? So potentially her getting so far ahead that I cannot catch her relates to this action of fishing. I've never thought about it this way, right? But it's like maybe I could turn my mom from not mom back to mom if I could catch her. this transformation works one way, maybe it would work the other way. Because it's weird that he's like understands that, or tries to understand that it's not mom anymore, but then, and now she is getting so far ahead, I cannot catch her. Like he still thinks his mom is out there somewhere. Ella, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is that like he thinks that maybe there's a chance that she's somewhere.
Yeah.
That he's just like not coming to terms with that his mom cannot be his mom.
Yes. And I think it's so tragic because then he has to think of it as she abandoned him, that she's running away from him, and that it was some sort of like choice that she made to leave him, right? And I think that's part of where he gets super angry. He gets really, really angry. He's like, that fat son of a bitch. I just like saying that one out loud in class. But he runs into this shed and he's going to beat Peabody's horses. So he's conflating Peabody. He thinks, okay, when Peabody showed up, that's when my mom became not mom. And so it must be Peabody who did this to her. The doctor must have done this to her, right? And then there's this line as he's experiencing this, though, that I think is just like so poignant. It says, I enter the stall. This is just a few paragraphs down from the beginning. I enter the stall trying to touch him, and then I can cry. Then I vomit the crying. As soon as he gets through kicking, I can, and then I can cry, the crying can. He killed her, he killed her. The life in him runs under the skin under my hand. So he's feeling a horse right now. It's very confusing right there, but he's interacting with Peabody's horse. And that line, then I can cry, then I vomit the crying. Tell me about that line. Do you relate to that? I do too. Not like we don't have to get personal about it, but everybody's had that experience, right? Where it's like they're crying so hard that it feels like vomiting the crying instead. It's a kind of heaving. It feels like something is coming out of you, though, that it's like more substantial than just a noise, you know? And this is when he's starting to like do this thing called synesthesia. I can't say it. Let me write it down on the board. Synesthesia. Like that. Synesthesia is like you, I think we maybe talked about it in this class at some point, but it's like you can smell colors, or you can hear colors, or you can taste, taste one be, you can taste sound. It's when you get like the senses mixed up. So this vomit the crying is kind of the beginning of this. It's so descriptive. I think it's like the perfect description of something that people can relate to. But it is also him kind of tasting and feeling something that's insubstantial, like a cry, which is a noise, you know? And he says, then I can breathe. He says, he keeps saying this, the life in him runs under the skin under my hand, running through the splotches, smelling up into my nose where the sickness is beginning to cry, vomiting the crying, and then I can breathe, vomiting it. It makes a lot of noise. I can smell the life running up from under my hands, up my arms, and then I can leave the stall. So there's something a little cathartic, I think, to him about vomiting the crying. And somehow it's related to this idea of the not fish having not blood, I think. How could we relate those ideas? Like he sees this fish blood on his hands and he's like, no, it's not blood anymore. And then he talks about vomiting the crying and feeling better. I feel like those two things must be related because it's something about that inside becoming outside. Yeah.
In a way where he sees the not blood, he just is like, kind of denial. So he starts crying and feeling that emotion, and instead he turns it into like, oh, I'm just vomiting out this noise. It's kind of him denying that he has this like crying emotion and that he feels this immense sadness in a way to be like, to like part ways from it, because it's really hard to accept that kind of death. So instead he's like crying. He's like, I don't want to cry. And so he's like, I'm not, it's just I'm vomiting it.
Interesting. So he turns what was an emotional reaction into a physical reaction. It's easier to deal with the physical than the emotional. Yeah, Emberly.
Kind of like he like compares vomiting to crying, so it's as if he's like getting out all of the crying, and so like in a way his grief becomes like not grief in a way as it comes out.
Yeah.
And it's just something else that's gone.
Okay, good. I kind of think of that then it's almost like a seance thing. Like that, you know, have you guys seen those weird pictures of, this is so random, but of seances that they doctored these, I mean, unless you believe in ghosts. In this class, we're not going to read Wuthering Heights, so I won't be making fun of my students for believing in ghosts, but I know some of you do. Anyway, they have doctored these images to look like something is coming out of the spiritualist's mouth. It's called ectoplasm, right? And it's like this way of saying I'm purging the spirit here from deep inside the spiritualists. And so now the spirit can be out there in the world and we can interact with it. And it kind of seems like that's what this is with grief. I'm purging the grief. If I can think of it as a kind of vomit. Don't you feel better after you vomit? I mean, like if you're actually really sick, if you're nauseous and you feel like you need to throw up, I feel like just like trying to choke it down. This is gross. I don't want to talk about this anymore, but it feels better when you throw up, right? And I think that's kind of, it's because there was something rotten inside that you need to get out. And so it's a literal purge here as well as like the way that we think of catharsis being a purge of emotions.
So what I'm hearing is Mark is a poltergeist situation. He's
Sure.
throwing up the demon.
Yes, the demon is his emotions. Yes. Okay, so then he has this interaction with Dewey Dell that we hear about a little bit later, where Dewey Dell is like milking a cow and really relating to this cow, and she sees Vardaman and gets really mad at him for being in the shed, and he thinks, I'm not. This is towards the end now, so go to the end of that section. He says, I'm not crying now. I'm not anything. Dewey Dell comes to the hill and calls me, Vardaman. I am not anything. I am quiet. You, Vardaman, I can cry quiet now, reeling and hearing my tears. So it does seem that he's moved past the hyperventilating, controlling kind of grief, and now he's like, I can stay quiet. But the way he thinks about that, I am not anything, because he is quiet. What do we make of that? How does he view then noise and his sort of relationship to words or sound as like confirming his presence? Because he says, I'm not anything. Yeah, so.
It almost seems like when he's devoid of sound, he's kind of relating himself to his mother, like, kind of losing that same sort of fire that,
yeah,
I guess, animating aspect of being human.
Yes, I can see that, right? Like if something is not talking, then it is a not person anymore. If someone's not communicating in any way with any sound, then they are just as good as dead, basically. And he sees then, he's kind of in this still state then in the shed. And you got to imagine this shed, like it's hot. It has rained, like there was a crazy amount of rain, or there's going to be, that's right. I'm trying to figure out where we were. Okay. There's going to be a crazy amount of rain, right? So this, we talked about the heaviness and the humidity in the air, and he's in this super dark shed. And he says, this is the last paragraph, it is dark. I can hear wood silence. So that's another example of that synesthesia. You can't hear wood, or can you? What is he actually hearing then? What does it mean to hear wood? Yeah.
To me, it sounds like he's hearing like footsteps or someone like
on the wood.
On the wood.
Okay, cool. So he could hear like the horse sort of moving around maybe, and he can hear the footsteps on the wood. Yeah. Any other ideas about hearing the wood sound?
I think it might be when, everything is so silent that you hear that sort of buzzing and creaking and that nothing else. Like it's almost like you're imagining noise.
Yeah, okay, so it's like we are kind of uncomfortable with pure silence. Usually we'll hear something, some sort of ringing or some sort of creaking or whatever. I think it's like, I feel like I've been in a situation though, like in the woods maybe, where you kind of like can smell the wood so strongly that it's almost like you're hearing it. It's like this transference of senses, and he's going to keep doing this. He says, I know them, he's saying about the horse, but not living sounds, not even him. So it's like I know that I'm not really hearing anything. It's the wood I'm hearing. It is as though the dark were resolving him out of his integrity into an unrelated scattering of components. So he knows this horse is in the room with him, but it is so dark that he can't see the horse. And he says the darkness is resolving him. What does it mean to resolve something?
To like kind of come to a point where oh wait, I had it and then
I feel like this was a good.
Yeah, it's like it's like when you have a problem, you're able to fix it, and it makes you feel better, and it feels like things start to come together.
Yes, absolutely. So if that's resolved, then it seems ironic to say resolving him out of his integrity. How can you resolve something if someone's integrity is moving outward? So the movement that Ella's doing is, this is a resolution, right? A kind of coming together. We think of it as like all the pieces kind of coming together to solve the problem. That's a resolution. So to resolve something is bringing those things together. But it says it's resolving him out of his integrity. It seems like the way that should be said is dissolving him out of his integrity, right? But he says resolving him. What's that about, Brooklyn?
I think this is kind of like a moment of like realization, or like maybe his imagination kind of when he's like kind of realizing something like this horse like has something malicious about it, like how he had attacked it, I guess, or something like. I'm not sure where I'm trying to get out of that here, but like kind of what we were saying with like the theme of like vomiting, like. I mean, obviously, when you vomit something back up, you can see it, and so like now it's resolved like out of its integrity, like he can see it in front of him.
Yes, right? And so even though it's dark, there's some kind of resolution because it's kind of somehow dissolving in front of him. Yeah, listen to how it goes. Snuffings and stamping. So that's the sound that he hears. Smells of cooling flesh and ammoniac hair. So that's what he smells of the horse. And then he says an illusion of a coordinated whole of splotched hide and strong bones, within which, detached and secret and familiar, and is different from my is. All right, so the illusion of a coordinated whole of splotched hide and strong bones. A coordinated whole makes sense to me, like a being that acts in coordination, even though it's got like muscles and tendons and bones and brain and whatever, it all acts. It's a coordinated whole, right? But then he says it's an illusion of a coordinated whole. So in this moment, he's starting to see this horse as all its different parts. And he says somewhere in there, there is an is different from my is. And this is like, we see this language echoed again in Darrell's section, which we're going to look at here in a bit. But basically, he's like seeing this horse and he's like, this thing has a different kind of consciousness than I have. This thing is separate from me. It is not the same as me. Maybe he's also being able to, I understand here that it's not the same as Peabody either, that it's its own sort of thing. But he knows that this thing is different. And he says, I see him dissolve. Legs, a rolling eye, a gaudy splotching like cold flames, and float upon the dark in fading solution. All one yet neither, all either yet none. So this dissolving part, I just think of it like an LSD painting, where things are maybe let's make it more PG, like an MC Escher painting, or who's the guy who did the melting clocks? You guys know who I'm talking about, right? The melting clocks picture.
Oh, Salvador Dali.
Dali, yeah. I imagine this as a kind of Dali painting, but LSD painting works too, if you're more familiar with that imagery. It's where things are sort of like floating in the darkness, right? And he's like, oh, there goes a leg, there goes a haunches, there goes a snoot or whatever. Like, it's all these different pieces. And yet he also understands it as being one. All one yet neither, all either yet none. All right, so he's having this weird, I don't know how else to say it except for it's LSD, like a weird acid trip in this shed, right? Where he's like, there's all these different pieces of something, and yet I'm understanding it as a single whole, and yet it's a coordinated whole, but that's an illusion. It is all these different pieces. Yeah, Sam.
I think that he's, kind of, for lack of a better term, having an existential crisis and becoming what would be called a reductionist, like seeing animals and people and things as nothing more than their parts. Like there's like, basically if you put a bunch of cells together, or an arm and a leg and all this, then you have a person. There's nothing else added there. That would be the reductionist view.
Yeah.
And he seems to be imagining that that's the case at this point.
Yeah, and yet he doesn't totally refuse that it also is a whole too, because he says all one yet neither, all either yet none. So it does seem to be that he like understands that it's parts, but it is also and is different from my is. Right? So he's like a reductionist in the way that he's like, yeah, all of this is just a bunch of parts. I can cut up the fish and it becomes not fish, and it's just fish parts, right? I can see the blood, and because it's outside of the fish now, it's not blood. And yet in this moment, he's like, but he has an is different from my is. So there's still a kind of is there, even in the kind of like separation of parts. Have you ever thought about yourself as just parts? It's weird. Like I'm just these are just fingers. And like the fact that I can move them is just neurons, sort of like speaking to my, I don't know science, speaking to my fingers and letting me move these fingers, right? And like, here's a foot. And when you start to think about like, what does it feel like right now to be sitting in this chair? It's this kind of dissociative moment, like idea, right? It's a way of meditation to think of the different parts. And yet part of the goal of meditation is so that you can become kind of at peace with yourself as a self. And so to me, I see what he's doing here as almost helpful to his grieving process. Tell me about how this might relate to how he's seeing his mom's death. Yeah.
So he has this like where he's saying like not fish and blah blah blah. But when he's in this shed, he's realizing that like saying not fish may mean not fish for him, but it is still a fish even after death. And it's like him coming to like these kind of connections when everything's like shifting, and he's like, maybe that even if my mom, like he's might start thinking that even if his mom is dead, it is still his mom, and so he'll feel like not that less abandonment. He'll feel like realize that like, oh, what happened was just like the part taking place, and that he couldn't control it, and even though his mother is just a bunch of parts, it's still something.
Yeah, I like that. I also want to point out, like, okay, wait, let's finish the end of this. It says, I can see hearing, so he's having that synesthesia still. I can see hearing coil toward him, caressing, shaping his hard shape, fetlock, hip, shoulder, and head, smell and sound. I am not afraid. So it does end with that kind of positive attitude here. I'm not afraid. And whether that is because he is dealing with it by dissociating all of it and just saying, whatever, it's just material, I don't need to worry about it, or whether he's dealing with it by saying you can be parts and a whole at the same time. Like my mom can have parts of her, but also be a whole at the same time. I think that I am not afraid at the end suggests that he is starting to deal with grief though. But then he says cooked and et, thinking about the fish again. And I think what is important to me here is that he starts the section in the first person. I begin to run, I run toward the back. And by the end, he is thinking cooked and et in the past tense. And I think present and past tense becomes really important in this book. So keeping that in mind, that he's like, kind of like, he's able to think about how the fish was cooked and eaten. Back et, I think in this case means eaten. Is that a word, eaten? I think I ate, but I have eaten, right? What a horrible word that is. It's my new least favorite word. So anyway, the fact that he can move from the present and into thinking about the past, I think is really important for this character and will become more important later. All right, let's look at Darrell's section now, because remember last time I told you that a bunch of reviewers were very mad about this book because they said it does, astonishing violence to plausibility. They were like, this little kid, this Vardaman kid, a Southern boy without a formal education who clearly cannot communicate in a way that we would see as academic or philosophical, like formally philosophical, right? That he could be thinking of words like ammoniac, and that he would be thinking his is different from my is. Before we get to Darrell's section, tell me, how do we justify that? Because I'm saying that this book is like one of the best books ever written, so I must justify this in some way to say that like Faulkner did this on purpose. How do we justify the fact that he's speaking this way? Emily?
I think part of it is like a literary device, but I also think that Gardner might be on the autism spectrum just from the way he reacts to things, and like how he goes between like hyposensitivity and hypersensitivity and disassociation.
Yeah.
And like how he deals with all that. So in a way, like he really could be that smart. How he like can't communicate, but at the same time thinking super abstractly and stuff.
Yes.
But
good. So this is abstract thought then on the page. It's not direct thought, directly translated onto the page. When you guys think about stuff, do you think about it in language? Sometimes, right? Like it's kind of a mixture. Sometimes it's just abstract thought and you don't actually put it into words. You just kind of know you have this idea. That idea of his is different than my is. That might not be the way that I thought about it. It would just be somehow a thought, not even an image either. Not an image, not words, just a thought. So this might be this translation of that abstract thought in language then that conjures Vardaman's thought for us. So like the cat, the language is arbitrary, but it is conveying this true idea that Vardaman, the character of Vardaman is having. Yeah, Ella.
Well, first off, I know it's kind of sensitive, but didn't you say he was drunk while he was writing this?
Yes.
I feel like sometimes you can see that, especially like with the Vardaman scene,
Yeah.
just barely the whole time. Like, man, he must have been really drunk that night. Right? Because it's like something weird, but then
Yeah.
I also see his Vardaman have maybe like Asperger's, because I know a lot of people with it, and it's like they're super like, they are very smart in some ways, but in others they just don't understand it.
Mhm.
And so I see that with like, because like in his head he's super like smart, he makes sense in a way,
Mhm.
and he's starting to understand things on like a like almost like higher way, which sounds like somebody on shrooms would say, but like
Mhm.
he sees like this kind of melting away, and like in a way it's like he's overwhelmed, and that can happen a lot with the autism, is where you start to like get overwhelmed and it just everything starts to like kind of seem like too much, and that's what then like he doesn't know how to like process that in a way, and I see that as like he understands some things and other things are just like alien.
Okay, good. So it's like the only way then that a reader that is not thinking in the way that Vardaman does, like for whatever reason, the only way for a reader to understand this thought process is to put that into language for the reader, but it can't directly convey the way that Vardaman is thinking. But this, I think the mistake here is us thinking that this section is Vardaman says, as though he is a narrator. He's not a narrator. This is him on the page being represented. That's such a weird idea. I think it's really important for this book, though, to understand that he's not saying that Vardaman exists outside of these pages. This is Vardaman, and so it doesn't really matter if he represents words that Vardaman would say or not. It just is Vardaman. Brooklyn?
I also think that like the way the thoughts are very, or not thoughts, but like the words are very abstract. I think it's also kind of showing like the difference between like what he's taking in and what he's seeing versus how he's translating it.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's able to see these things as like a whole thing, and he's like he sees the whole horse, but then the way his mind works, or the way this character works, is he rearranges things. And so the way it's translated on the page is kind of like makes it seem out of order.
Yes, it's a rearrangement then of ideas in order to represent the way that he rearranges things in his mind. Oh, I love that. I really love that. Yeah. Okay, so then let's look at how Darl does stuff, because the other thing people say is like, why is Vardaman so much like Darl? Why do they think similarly? So this is the end of section 17. This is right before Cash has his list. I just want to make sure. Okay. And this is where Darl has his existential crisis. Vardaman's might not have been, like Sam was like, for lack of a better term, it might not have been existential in the way that we thought with Crime and Punishment. Wait, in this class we did talk about existentialism, right? Yeah. Long time ago. Okay. He is definitely starting to think, what am I? In this last paragraph, in a way that gets very confusing. So we're going to go through it very slowly. So it says, in a strange room, you must empty yourself for sleep. Do you see this section? What page is it on? 80. Okay. In a strange room, you must empty yourself for sleep. And before you are emptied for sleep, what are you? Okay, so he's saying like, I want to go to sleep. Here I am in this room, I want to go to sleep, right? And he says you have to empty yourself. What does that tell us about the self? How he's thinking about what the self is, what identity is. Yeah, Brooklyn.
I think it's like your thoughts in your mind. There's like, or your consciousness.
Yeah.
Because you can't really like, I mean, you can have like dreams and thoughts while you're asleep, but like it's mostly just like
Yeah, good. So he's like, in order to fall asleep, you have to kind of abandon consciousness and then you fall into this sleep state, right? But what's interesting to me there is the division. So you have to empty yourself. So which part is the you and which part is the self gets mixed up. Does that make sense? If you are the one falling asleep, how can you think of a you that can abandon consciousness? Does that mean that there is still a you that is out there, but the conscious part of you is falling asleep? So you are split into two, one who is active and one who does, like the active one does something to the inactive one? It's bizarre. It's a bizarre way to think about it. He says, and before you are emptied for sleep, what are you? And when you are emptied for sleep, you are not. Okay, but I said it with a question mark. You could think of it this way. And before you are emptied for sleep, what are you? What are you? I'm trying not to say it as a question. So you are what? Do you get what I'm saying? Kind of. He's like saying, like, he could either be saying, okay, if I am emptying myself for sleep, then am I some combination of this split identity? Am I a full person, right? And before you are emptied for sleep, what are you? It's like, okay, when I'm not asleep, then I am some kind of a what? I'm a material thing. I'm a whole, kind of like the horses before you dissolve it into parts. Yeah, Ella.
So are you saying that in this he's saying like when you go to sleep you can never understand what is happening to yourself like on like once you fall asleep completely because like you're in like is he saying like when you fall asleep that part that like in your head where you're dreaming is separate from your actual body?
Yeah. Yes. And I think he's trying to say like that means that there's still a you that is not conscious, but then there is a you that is conscious in your sleep. So it divides you into two people at least. Nah, you don't like that. And when you are emptied for sleep, he says, so what are you when you're emptied for sleep or before you're emptied for sleep? Because you're a what, you're a thing, you know? And when you're emptied for sleep, you are not. So he kind of seems to think that it's the one who is not conscious then in that situation that is the you. You are not. You're not yourself anymore. And when you are filled with sleep, you never were. Okay, what does that part mean? Yeah.
Is it because you're never conscious in that when you're sleeping that you can't experience that sleep because you're still awake in your mind because you're dreaming and stuff?
I'm not sure I followed that one.
Because like in your mind, like when you sleep, you feels like this, and then you have dreams and stuff. So in a way, is he saying, oh, you don't really get to experience that sleep because you're always awake in your mind?
Yeah, I think that is part of it. Yeah. I think it could also go the other way, which is like you never were, meaning like the consciousness self is never that other part of yourself either that is not conscious. Really?
Well, is it kind of like, you ever watched Inception where they're kind of talking about it? They're just like, how did this dream start? And she's like, what do you mean? It's like, how did we get to this point? And she's like, I have no idea. It's like, you never were before, like, your dream. Like, your dream, you just are. And, like, there isn't a past tense. And you never reflect upon anything or look forward. It's just you are you.
Yes, that's such a clear way of saying that. Yeah, there's no past, there's no present. You never were. You are just this in this moment, and you're never going to be that again, and your other self can't have access to that. Yeah, Brooklyn.
Yeah, I like that how it shows kind of like a lack of like transition because like usually when you have to like when you go to like a different state or like some kind of if you go from like one room to the next, there's like a transition and you can sense that transition, but like it's kind of creepy to think, at least like for me, like I can never really tell like when I fall asleep. Like when I wake up in the morning, I can never say, oh, I fell asleep right at this moment when I was thinking of this. It just like happens somewhere and I just don't remember it.
Yeah. One of my favorite experiences is when you do kind of feel that transition. I didn't know that was sort of what I was thinking, but once I got married, like my husband will have conversations with me while I fall asleep that I don't remember having, but I kind of feel it. So I can kind of feel that transition where I'm just talking nonsense for a while. Do you guys talk in your sleep or talk in that stage? It's like this weird, like, you do kind of know the state in between, but I think Darl is experiencing what Brooklyn is talking about, which is like this abrupt transition you never were. Yeah, Ella.
So there was this one time I was on call with my friends and they were still talking to me, but I was falling asleep and they said something and I started going 11, 15, 20 minutes. I just started reciting random numbers and like they made no sense and like
Yeah,
so
that's exactly
like,
what I'm talking
I was
about. Yeah.
asleep, but then I like you saying the numbers freaked me out because I felt like I was being possessed because I didn't know what I was saying
So-
and I like snapped out and I'm like, did I just say a bunch of numbers? Like, yeah, we're kind of scared right now.
Yeah, so then which one's the real you? That's what Darryl is thinking about right now.
Oh my
Is it
God.
still you, the person who is reciting those numbers, or is that some sort of possession of another you? And does that mean that there's one you in control, one you not? Does that mean that you're ever a full person? Are you ever a you then? Yeah, Amberly.
There's this thing with anesthesia. If you it's not quite the same as like a wisdom tooth removal because they like inject it into you and then you just like are instantly gone.
Uh-huh.
But if it's like through a gas mask, you like float away basically. And there's like this in between state where you're like in another world and you can't remember your past, you can't remember your future, but you just kind of are and you're still you. But it's kind of like
Yes.
you're floating away and you can't get that with a normal sleep. But like with that, it's like super weird because you totally remember it afterwards, but it's like you had no idea in the moment.
And so it's with drugs, but that is the process of emptying yourself.
Yeah.
Then it's like this process he's talking about is drawn out then. I love that. And this leads him to say, I don't know what I am. Like, I think that like him thinking about sleep in this way, I don't know what I am. I don't know if I am or not. Okay, now let's think for a second here. Sorry. Let's think for a second here about then why he would be thinking about this in this moment. His mom has just died, right? And he's trying to think about the fact that his mom has died. Yes.
So maybe he's trying to separate the consciousness that left her body to like from like herself because
Yeah.
it's like, well, if we're not fully ourselves when we fall asleep, then like she's still here in a way.
It could be
It's
that.
just her consciousness is gone.
It could be a kind of positive way of thinking about it than that way. Like her consciousness floated away. It might be somewhere out there, right? However, when we were thinking about this, some of you were getting a little creeped out thinking about like not being. So how could this potentially have the opposite effect? Not so comforting for his view of how his mom died. Yeah.
Kind of the idea that part of her is still trapped within her body, but that she'll never be able to get out, and she's just like stuck in this weird in-between state where she won't be and she like never was, but she's just like stuck.
Yes, I think it's that never was that is so scary here too. Okay, so like, yeah, it's that idea that what if you don't think that there is any sort of afterlife at all, and you're trying to contemplate what it would mean to actually die. You can't because the act of contemplation suggests that you're still alive, right? So it's this terrifying fear of nothingness right there. I don't know if I am or not. Jewel knows he is because he does not know that he does not know whether he is or not. Okay, what does that part mean? Jewel knows he is because he doesn't know that he does not know whether he is or not. Yeah.
Because he doesn't have that consciousness to like kind of like he's not having this existential
Yeah.
I'm stuck in the back of a cave and I can say anything and it means it's true. It's like he doesn't have that same thought. He's like, well, he doesn't have the stress because he doesn't think the same way I do.
Yes. Yeah. It's like Jewel doesn't know that there is an existential crisis to be had. You know, he doesn't know that we have to think about these kind of questions if we're human. He cannot empty himself for sleep because he is not what he is, and he is what he is not. Kind of that same idea, but basically like he doesn't split himself into this consciousness, not conscious. He just falls asleep. Beyond the unlamped wall, I can hear the rain shaping the wagon that is ours. The load that is no longer theirs, that felled and sawed it, nor yet theirs that bought it, and which is not ours either, lie on the wagon though it does, since only the wind and the rain shape it, only to Jewel and me that are not asleep. All right, unpack that for me. Let's read it one more time. Beyond the unlamped wall, I can hear the rain shaping the wagon that is ours. So it's like the rain is hitting the wagon, kind of like flowing off. I like that verb there, shaping the wagon. The load that is no longer theirs, that felled and sawed it, nor yet theirs that bought it, and which is not ours either. What is lying on the wagon, by the way? Oh, the coffin, yes. Lie on our wagon though it does, since only the wind and the rain shape it, only to Jewel and me that are not asleep. So he's sitting there thinking about the rain kind of like falling down on the coffin, and he's thinking like, what does that belong to? Because if she's no longer Addie and never was Addie, then does she own herself anymore? Or who does this load belong to? She's not ours. She's not hers. What is she? So he's thinking about I don't know what I am, and now he's like, I don't know what my mom is really. And says, and since sleep is not, and rain and wind are was, it is not. Yet the wagon is, because when the wagon is was, Addie Bundren will not be. And Jewel is, so Addie Bundren must be. Tell me what that means. Help me. Okay, Brooklyn.
Kind of how he's saying like that Jewel isn't aware of like the existential crisis, and he doesn't think about like these things and how there's like two different sides of you. He just is, and then he is not. Like when he's asleep, like it's just kind of he's just in those states. He doesn't think about that, and I think he's kind of relating like, well, his mom's not thinking of these things. Obviously, she's just in some state, and so she, like the fact that both she and Jewel aren't thinking about it, they just are. I don't know what I'm saying anymore.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Jewel is, so Addie Bundren must be, like they must, maybe they think the same way then. So if Jewel just does things without thinking about consciousness and without contemplating whether or not he is still a person at any point in his life, he always just takes that for granted. I'm a person, right? Then Darla is like, okay, if Jewel thinks that way, then Addie Bundren must think that way. So she must still be in some way. Okay, do you think that's correct thinking? Do you think that that's Darl going off the rails? Like, how do we just, because Addie's dead, right? So how is he saying that Addie Bundren must be? Yeah.
That even, I think that since he compared to this, since Jewel is, so Addie Bundren must be, since like, she is his mother, there has to be like, it's not like since she's dead, she's completely gone.
Yeah.
It's in a way that her kids, since her kids are there,
yeah,
that means that she had to be.
Okay, good. So let's think about this in two different ways. We can think about this biologically, right? Jewel is half Addie. So in some ways, Addie's sort of biology lives on. Dewey Dell thinks about it this way a little bit. When Dewey Dell is thinking about her pregnancy, she thinks about it as an invasion. Like she thinks, like, I'm not alone anymore, so what am I? Like they're all having existential crises in their own way, right? So she's like, okay, if this baby is me, but not me, then what am I? Like I'm not alone anymore, but I still am. So what is this thing, right? And I think we could think of that in the adult Jewel too. Jewel is part Addie, so Jewel is Addie sort of living on, even though Addie has died. But we can also think about this psychologically. So if Jewel doesn't contemplate all of this existential nonsense, not nonsense, it's valid. But since Jewel doesn't have these kind of like spirals, basically, he's saying Jewel is just sure of reality. Like he doesn't have to think about these things because he just is. He exists in a world, he acts in a world, and the material realities of that world then are sort of like a part of him. So then if Addie was a person and Jewel interacted with Addie, then Addie lives on because he's still in the head. She is still in his head, right? So think about your cat. As long as you are alive, your cat lives on in your head, right? I put that image in your head. So like that cat lives, that cat, yeah, I guess you could kill it off in your head, but like that kind of image is conjured there. And it can still be thought of as an is, even if it never actually was. Addie Bundren can still be alive in Jewel's head, not in the way that Jewel is delusional and thinks Addie's still alive, but just like all of his past experiences with her, everything he knows and loves about his mom, like that can still live on, right? This is what is so scary to Darl, I think, because you could think of it that way, That's a beautiful thought. The dead still live on in our memories. Although I have heard something very scary about, like, think about this, at some point, the last person who ever knew you is going to die, and then you really die, right? Like, you're completely gone.
Deals with the
Yeah, it's like Coco, right? They do talk about, that is the thing. I mean, not just the Disneyfication of that idea, but that's what I know about Dia de los Muertos mainly. So yeah, it's like this idea that you live on, that's beautiful, keep the memory alive, etc. Think about it the other way though. If you are an image in someone else's head, someone has experiences with you, and then that person dies, then if you're thinking about yourself the way that Darl might be, which is like, I am just a collection of ideas, what am I if I am not a whole person? Then when that person dies, a part of you dies too. Does that make any sense? So like my parents have a certain memory of me, right? And it's gonna be different than how I think of me. They remember me before I had memories. They remember me in certain ways of thinking. They have conjured a representation of me in their head. And that means that when my parents died, that me dies too. And that's terrifying if you think that both of those me's are totally legitimate and equally valid. If you're not thinking of yourself as a complete whole person the way Jewel does, that interacts in a world, then someone else dying and erasing a part of yourself is like a further sort of division of yourself. Is that I think that's kind of the way Darl is thinking about it here, because he has to think of Jewel, and he's like, okay, but if Jewel is, then Addie Bundren still must be, so then maybe I still am, and then I must be, or I could not empty myself for sleep in a strange room. So he's like, so I still have consciousness, like, because if not, then I couldn't fall asleep. And so if I am not emptied yet, I am and is. So he's like really trying to assure himself, even though my mom died, I am still a person, and I am still a whole person. And yet I do kind of divorce like my brain from my body when I fall asleep, and then I'm two people, and my mom thinks of me, so then I'm three people, and then he has to come back. No, Jewel doesn't think this way, so I don't want to think this way either. I am and is. I swear I'm and is, right? And then this line that I just think is absolutely beautiful. How often have I lain beneath rain on a strange roof thinking of home? What's interesting there is he is home in this scene, is he not? He's not at the house yet.
I thought that they were still out on their excursion and like their riding wheel broke or something, so they were still out there in the rain.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. Okay, I messed that up. He's out there in the rain, yeah. How often have I lain beneath rain on a strange roof thinking of home? Then how is this home that he's thinking of? Yeah.
Maybe it's because, like, no matter where you are, you close your eyes and all you hear is rain on the roof, you can still think of that as your own home.
I like that. It's like this it's this ASMR moment, you know, like the rain is so beautiful that it's like nostalgic, and you can think, I'm at home in this place. Yeah. I don't know that he's feeling that comforted right now, though. I think he's trying. Thinking of home.
It doesn't say home, sweet home, it just says home.
Yeah. Yeah, Brooklyn.
It kind of makes me think of like this, like how you were saying, with like the different parts of you and different people's memories, like how many people, like in how many minds, I guess, has he had the same experience, or has like if Jewel's watching him fall asleep, then he exists in Jewel's head falling asleep.
Yes.
And then it's just kind of like that mirror effect, is like just like
yes.
This, and then it just keeps going.
Yes, and I think he finds a certain kind of comfort in that. He is validating himself through other people's experiences, and that's the way that he can validate his own existence. Not validating in the way that, like, this person gives me validation that I'm doing the right thing. It's this person gives me validation that I am actually a human being, alive. So it's an existential crisis in that he's like, he seems like a stoner. Like, are we all in a dog's dream? Like that's kind of the mode he's going down. But he looks at Jewel, and he's assured, no, this person is. So then if Jewel is, I can be. I am too.
So couldn't every person be a different representation of the drug? He's weed. Acid.
Yeah. Ants is just alcohol, probably, right? What's Dewey Dill?
Dewey Dill is just crack cocaine. She's just losing it.
No, Dewey Dill is heroin, maybe contraceptive. Oh no. Okay. Cash is Adderall. I really like this idea. Okay. Yeah. So the main point here with Darl is like early on we get these ideas that he does not trust this idea. So like he is worried about the fact that he is conjured in somebody's head, because that means that somebody could kill him off. And that if there's a kind of magic that occurs in language, then language is so legitimate, so magical, that it actually creates reality, and it's fragile, can be undone too. Whereas Vardaman here is looking in the shed, and he's using language, like he's naming each of the parts, right? He's using language to both separate things into their parts and find comfort in the fact that they are both parts and a whole. By the end, I'm not afraid, right? Whereas Darl's like separating things into parts, like I exist here, I exist here, I exist here, and it is the opposite of comforting. It is very terrifying to Darl, and then he's like, oh, I'm gonna lay here, I'm gonna think of home. Yeah, I'm really.
There's this weird part from Dewey Dill's perspective. I didn't understand what she's saying, that she stabbed Darl and killed him.
I think she's
Like
imagining.
or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, she didn't actually say that she's imagining it though, but I mean, he came back, so he didn't actually kill him. But is that like in a way her killing him off in her head, and that way like he's like being lost?
Yes. Yeah. Will you find that section for me? Because I remember thinking that same thing. Oh, Dewey Dill. It's in the section you read for today, right?
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't talk about the pretty coffin that Toll draws.
It feels like a Geronimo still when it does that.
It feels like what?
A Geronimo still in when it has a little drawing.
Yes. Okay. So it's this is in section 30. So it's the last part that you read for today, and it's when it starts to go into italics, which we haven't talked about the italics that you're on. Like the italics don't always mean the same thing, and it's infuriating. Usually in books, italics are like, oh, now we're inside Harry's head, or italics are, oh, this is now the past. Like they use italics to signify something about the timeline or the plot or the characters. And in this case, it just seems like italics are thrown in there to force us to think of these as words instead of real events. So it's like, here's a picture of a coffin. Is this picture of a coffin any different than the word of a coffin? Or it'll say, here are italics. Are italics any different than the stuff that came before? And it's like, kind of pulls you out of the text each time. It's disruptive, forces you to be analytical when you're trying to just get the story, But anyway, this is like, I saw Vardaman rise. So the paragraph starts, the land runs out of Darl's eyes, right? The part that you're thinking of, Emberly?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just start there. They swim to pinpoints. They begin at my feet and rise along my body to my face. And then my dress is gone. I sit naked on the seat above the unhurrying mules, above the travail. She is not the first character in this book to imagine she's naked when she's not, which is interesting. We can maybe talk about that later. Suppose I tell him to turn. He will do what I say. Don't you know he will do what I say? Once I waked with a black void rushing under me. I could not see. I saw Vardaman rise and go to the window and strike the knife into the fish, the blood gushing, hissing like steam, but I could not see. He'll do as I say. He always does. I can persuade him to anything. You know I can. Suppose I say turn here. That was when I died that time. Suppose I do. We'll go to New Hope. We won't have to go to town. I rose and took the knife from the steaming fish still hissing, and I killed Darl. So yeah, what is happening there? Daryl's still alive, by the way. Daryl is not dead. Yeah, Brooklyn.
I think like, and the way she says before that, like when I died that time, she kind of used like different points in her life or different transitions of thoughts or realizations, and when she dies or like an
Yeah.
old version of herself died, like she used to think this way, then she like died and is thinking another way. So maybe she had a perception of Darl in her head, like maybe that he was like nicer or something, and then she's mad that he knows or something, and so
Yeah.
that old Darl died in her head, and now there's this new one.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That sounds as right to me as I can figure out from this little section. Yeah, she seems to think that in this section, she's like, that was when I died. That time is not in italics, right? And then I rose and took the knife from the steaming fish, still hissing, and I killed Darl. It's almost like flipped, that the italics indicate more of a reality than the non-italicized parts. The non-italicized parts are like her imagination, not articulated, kind of like Vardaman, where it was more like this version of Darl is not going to exist anymore. Like the Darl that sees her as kind of an innocent person is not going to exist anymore because she killed him with her actions. Look at the next paragraph, because she keeps having this moment that seems very similar to Vardaman's and Darl's. It says, when I used to sleep with Vardaman, I had a nightmare once. I thought I was awake, but I couldn't see and couldn't feel the bed under me, and I couldn't think what I was. I couldn't think of my name. I couldn't even think I am a girl. I couldn't even think nor even think I want to wake up, nor remember what was opposite to awake. So I could do that. I knew that something was passing, but I couldn't even think of time. Then all of a sudden I knew that something was. It was wind blowing over me. It was like the wind came and blew me back from where it was. I was not blowing the room and Vardaman asleep, and all of them back under me again, and going on like a piece of cool silk dragging across my naked legs. Doesn't that sound similar to Darl's sort of like fear of what it feels like to empty yourself for sleep? It's like she exists in this in-between stage. It's like she has to sit there being floated away, but she doesn't see herself as herself anymore. She is just like, it reminds me of a night terror here, that she's just like a nothing for a second. She experienced what it felt like to be nothing. Yeah, so I think she has her own little crisis right there that's different than Darl's, different than Vardaman's. All of them are experiencing this because of their mother's death. Like it's the catalyzing event that makes them experience this thing. So when we come back, we'll talk about the next section. The next section I'm having you read is a little bit longer. I think you're going to 46. I kind of combined two together. So read a little tonight so that you're not struggling to read this all the night before. But the plot picks up, which is fun. So, all right, then Ella, I will see you later. And you're good. You won't need to do anything on Canvas for today. Can hear me.